Thank you, everybody, for participating in the first of what we hope to be many quality assurance sessions. And we're today highlighting and celebrating what we are identifying as teacher and staff engagement with students. So we have a couple of rules that we're putting into place. First of all, you're all, other than the panel group, you're all muted. So please use the chat window that's built into Zoom to ask questions. We want to encourage you to ask questions. However, we're going to hold those questions off until the end. We have an audience Q&A time at the end, and then we'll just narrate the questions and ask panel participants to jump in and answer them. Also, this session's being recorded, so if you find that there are some things that some other staff members who didn't come to the meeting could benefit from, please encourage them to listen to the session, and we'll provide a link to that after the meeting. So this is our agenda for today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the criteria for selection. Jackie's going to introduce all the panel participants, and then we're going to jump into interview questions, and then we'll have our audience Q&A. First, criteria for selection. So as you know, we've been collecting lots and lots of data, and we wanted to identify staff members that have caseloads that are engaging students at a high level of performance. And so these are ranges of certain data points of our caseload panel contestants. Yeah, they're competing for prizes. A sandwich. And anyways, so we have a high of a caseload of 67 and a low of 35. All of them had very high attendance rates, all above 85%, so they were getting students engaged with attendance. Response rates were all high, typically 2.9. We even had one panel member that had a response rate of 8 during the time we were looking at the data. Time on task, again, very high. We were looking for folks that had a time on task for students of 10 or higher. And then login rate was very high as well, 2.9 or above. The tier 1-4 combos, again, very impressive. Every panel member was at least able to achieve 25% tier 1 to 10% tier 4 level. And we even had one achieve a 46% tier 1 to 0% tier 4 level, which was very, very impressive. So we wanted to find out and kind of dig deeper into their minds and ask them, what are you doing that's so effective at engaging students? And this was the result of that question.
So without further ado, we'll go ahead and introduce our panel participants here. We'll be introducing them in the order that they'll be speaking to each of the questions that we have today. So first up, we have Michelle Palmgren. She's a teacher at the Escanaba Center, and this is actually her first school year here with us at Success. She's a certified SPED teacher, and she's also served as an interventionist in her previous educational experience. We've got Carrie Mizade. Many of you know her. She's been with us for 6 school years so far. She started off at the Alger Center, moved over to Alpine, and is now serving in her new role as a math interventionist for the cyber schools. So she's a math certified teacher. We've got Brian DePatti here with us. He's an English teacher at GR South. He's in his 3rd school year at Success here, and he has previous experience teaching English out in Colorado. We've got Nolan from the Muskegon Center. He's in his 2nd school year with us, working as a parapro. He came to us right out of Grand Valley with an econ degree, but he's very familiar with the Muskegon area, so he's been able to form some pretty solid relationships with students at Muskegon. And then we also have Ty Parker here with us from Three Rivers. He's a certified science teacher, and this is his 3rd year at Success, but he's been teaching for quite a while. His past experience, he was at Kalamazoo for about 20 years teaching there. So you can see we've got a lot of variety in our panel here. We have teachers from centers that are in rural areas, centers that are in urban areas, and we also have a wide level of experience. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen here. That way you guys can see our panel participants. And we'll get started with our very first question. And Michelle, we'll have you take it away with kicking us off after we go through this question. So Michelle, what communication strategies do you use to build relationships as well as set goals with students?
Okay. I use the comment for my, sorry, there's a feedback here. For most of my communication, like 95% of my students, I communicate with the Comm app. So that does allow me to communicate more efficiently and quicker rather than having to track them down. I ask a lot of questions. If I send them like their daily goal, I'll ask a follow-up question like, does this sound like an okay plan? When will you get started? And then that kind of hooks them in, and I'm able to have an actual back and forth conversation with them after I see that they can respond to me. I message almost daily to every single student. I give them like a daily goal, like you should probably be completing this much percent. It'll be this assignment that you have to complete in order to get that percentage. How are you going to do that? And again, I end it with a question. If they talk about anything personal, I'm always asking more. I have a student that just recently told me, I won't be able to work, I'm going to a concert. I ask what concert. I tell them to have fun, be safe. So anytime there's an ounce of personal information shared with me, I do kind of like to follow up and try to get to know the student.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing what you do with students. Carrie, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah. So I use Facebook or text messaging quite a bit when I'm reaching out to my students. That way, for me, it's easier to bring up old conversations with them. So if I asked them like what they had planned for the weekend, then on Monday, I make sure that I mention what they said they were going to do and see if they had a good time or, you know, what happened. That way, same with how Michelle is, I'm trying to ask them more personal questions and getting them to respond to me about what's going on in their life instead of just about what their schoolwork is doing. And then I also give them a daily goal pretty much every single day with what their ingenuity needs to be up to. Because I feel like if I tell them to do 7%, they don't know what 7% actually is. So I tell them to make sure to get their class up to 53% or actually go by when they can log out of their class in ingenuity. Then the big thing is just building those relationships, make sure the students feel comfortable talking to you about whatever they need. Ask them what time they can do things, not what time you're available to help them. That goes a big way too.
Awesome. Thank you, Ryan.
All right, so this year I started something new, just kind of trying to figure out the communication thing. And so I've really built it around expectation. I did the orientations to start the year, which was really helpful because I could really say, our goal is 34%, anything less, you're not hitting it. And I was able to do that in a group context. Then just providing structure around that. So what I did this year is I set up Mondays and Wednesdays, I have phone calls scheduled with every student so that we have a time to chat. It's usually just a couple minutes, but we talk about how life is, what they're doing personally, but then also what they're learning about and on Wednesdays. And on Mondays, we talk more about progress, like what's your plan for Tuesday night. So there's that structure there. And then of course, support, I ask them if they're, you know, if they haven't made much progress, are they struggling with anything? And then accountability too, if they're not reaching the goals that they need to be reaching. Also weekly or daily, I send their daily goal, as well as on Wednesdays and Mondays, I'll send their weekly goal. And that's the Edgenuity number, not the, hey, you're at 10% of 34. Always work on the Edgenuity numbers. And then I will also try to follow up with just personal questions if I have time later in the day.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Nolan, you're up.
So a lot of the same stuff that's been mentioned, I do utilize. One of the things I did start this year, on Wednesdays, I picked about 10 or so, 8 to 10 or so students at the beginning of the school year and set up Google Hangout times with them on Wednesdays. I didn't know interval-wise where to schedule it, so it ended up being about 10-minute conversations each, but basically we're scheduled throughout the day, and we just go over, you know, quick check-in, you know, class, learning, everything like that. Then the rest, I'm like, what do you guys want to talk about? Anything? Do you guys want questions for me? Do you have questions in your class? Is there anything we can talk about? And I really found doing that on Wednesdays, it gave them a sort of an accountability. So, like, hey, I'm meeting with Mr. Nolan at this time. And I really did enjoy using the Google Hangout. A lot of us did here. and they're really like no more than 5-minute conversations with the students. And other than that, I really like the Comm app. And then as soon as I would call a student, I've really gotten to the habit of immediately messaging them on the Comm app. And most of the time they do respond. If it's like, hey, just gave you a call, boom, message. And then just on Fridays, I've really taken to, so we have whiteboards behind our desk, and I put like a little quote on there, and not every student comes into the center. So every Friday, it's always motivational quote on a Friday, just go into the weekend strong, meet your progress. And I make sure they respond to me, and so I can get the response right back, and we can get that conversation going on a Friday before the weekend.
Fantastic. But that's a great way to engage your kids. Thanks for sharing, Nolan. Ty?
So when I first started doing this, I think Facebook was the big messenger, was the big way I communicated. But even towards the end of last year, I found it sort of faux pas to do the Facebook because kids would ignore it. So I started doing a lot of texting. So I would follow every message that I sent to them with a text message to remind them, hey, I sent you a message earlier today. I didn't hear from you. What's going on? And they got sick of that. So they started really responding more to the Facebook stuff. Well, this year, because of the Comm app, I've gotten away from the messenger, and it took a while. It took a long while to get kids into sort of a routine. I think the other teachers kind of hit some main points, and the main points are, one person had mentioned about doing the orientations. I think that's super important. I do all the orientations. I think right away they get to know what my expectations are, even though they're everybody's expectations. When it comes from me, I think that's a little bit different. I try to send my messages out every Wednesday. As soon as I get to work, I start, sending messages out one by one. I do, like the other teachers, I do a lot of asking, not a lot of telling. Hey, I wouldn't say something like you have to do this. It's more like, hey, do you got a couple of minutes today to, log into your class and get that quiz done or that test done that you're on? And so I don't have anything profound to say because I think everybody else has pretty much hit on what I do. And I think it sounds like a broken record, really, listening to everybody.
Thanks for sharing, Ty. I think you hit it on the head. There's sounds like you all communicate with your students a little bit differently, but there's some main themes and strategies that come up, specifically that communication frequency, engaging with students daily, and also requesting responses and asking questions, and getting deeper into students' personal lives, as well as relating that back to educational goals and their long-term goals. So that's great to hear from all of you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Very impressive. So I have the next question. How do you use the dashboard data to impact your strategy week by week? Michelle, you're up first.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about the staff dashboard and the center dashboard, not on Pulse, but on our Google Sheet. First, I was always only looking at the percent progress, to be honest with you. I'm brand new, and that's what really mattered to me. And when I noticed that I finally got them where I wanted them, I'm like, okay, well, I just need them all to complete the same percent or higher. And of course, the percent progress will be higher every week. So I use that percent progress a lot for that. And it's what allowed me to realize I need to do those individual goals rather than everybody meet 30. The login rates, my students were not logging in as often as they should have been. I preach, hey, you should log in 5 days a week, do a little bit of work every day, but the login rate on my dashboard was showing me differently. So that allowed me to individually address those. I would go on to Pulse and see, okay, who's not logging in as often as they should. And I would set up interventions that way, or just even a reminder, hey, get logged in was good enough for some of them. Also, the biggest thing that has helped me on that dashboard is the tiers. My tier 4, being a special ed teacher, was way higher than I wanted it to be. So I had to sit down and say, okay, Michelle, how are you going to get this tier 4 gone? And I implemented some strategies that helped get my 0 performers performing.
Excellent, Michelle. Thank you. All right, Carrie, you're up.
Yes. So a big way that I use the dashboard is like when a student's at 0% and it's Friday, I don't want to send them another message saying, hey, you're at 0%. So that's my way to know that I need to go and look into their class and see if they're stuck on like a project or a lab template, or, you know, like see what they're actually on and what they're stuck on. That way, if it's an essay, then I can make a Google document and share the essay with them to help them start, you know, their introduction, come up with their 3 main topics and their conclusion. Same with the lab reports. I can make a template and put the table in it for them and send them the Google document. That way they can't just say, I don't know how to make my lab report. I'm actually sending them what to do so that it's easier for them to get past what they're stuck on. Because a lot of our students, they're not going to ask for help at first. So you need to show them that you're willing to help them and go out of your way to make sure that they can get their work done. And then the other thing is the login rate. A lot of our students can't log in 5 days a week. They have kids at home. They are working full time. They have things going on. So just being able to look at what their log rate is and coming up with their goals. So maybe their goal's not 7% a day because they can only log in 3 times a week. So then I can talk to them about, well, what's your schedule this week? What 3 days can you log in? And I can give them their daily goal based on how many times they can actually log in. So maybe their goal is 11% a day instead of the 7% because they're not going to log in as often. But the dashboard really gives me the different tools to look at what they're doing so that I can help them reach their goal in, you know, whatever way they need to.
Yeah, I probably do it about the same. I'm talking about the Pulse dashboard. So I will organize it by logins, organize it by time, organize it by progress, and then just evaluate who needs extra support. From there, in my phone conversation or sending messages, I'm trying to create tailored goals for them so that their goals will work for them. So usually when I talk about login with a student, though, it always ends up involving time, how much time they're going to spend. If we talk about logging in 4 times a week and they only log in for 10 minutes, it doesn't really do anything. Or if we talk about logging in for 2 hours at a time, but we don't talk about how many times a week, it doesn't really do much. So I usually just do those together and try and figure out what will work for the student. I think that's about.
All right, thanks, Brian. Nolan, you're up.
Yeah, so I've been looking really at that the Google Sheet dashboard a lot, and we've really taken to looking at that tier and that pie chart. And so I'm just making sure what are your tier 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s, and just understanding where do we really want to focus on at, because tier 1s, you can usually say those are the students who are going to give me 30% at least a week. Tier 2s, let's try and pump them up just a little bit, see if we can just do a little bit more. But tier 3s, as what we've noticed, are that big area where it's like, okay, they're either doing maybe 5%, 10%, what can we do to really get them engaged? Because any student that's at 0 in tier 4, that's almost like a different conversation to me about getting them involved back in school. It's like 1, 2, and 3, then 4. And so what we really wanted to focus on is what I do for sure is say, okay, I look at my pulse, I sort it by progress work today, I make that little cutoff, and I'm like, all right, these are the kids, I'm just going to focus on them at least just 2 to 3 days out of the week and just say, hey, what can we do to get you making an extra 5% this week? Not even 7, just an extra 5% this week, and then this week, and then just kind of keep building onto that. Because I actually did notice in my last numbers, I had a decent number, but my tier 1s ended up not doing as well, or not putting in as much work as they usually do. So it kind of masked my numbers in a way of what the real issue was, and that my tier 3s really needed to, and I really needed to focus on those kids. So that's something I've really liked too, is noticing, can't just rely on some students to make all the numbers look good and really focus on one aspect. So.
Great, Nolan. Good point. Ty, you're up.
So I think what I look at mostly on the dashboard is I pay attention to attendance. When the kids do come into orientation, what I talk to them about is being engaged with the school, and I always kind of give them success things that we see that successful students do, and things that we see that unsuccessful students do. And one of the things that I talk to them about is actually just talking to their teacher. And so when I look at the dashboard, my first thing is on Wednesday, I send everybody a message. On Thursday, I immediately sort by attendance. and I go to all the kids that are not in attendance, and I send them 3 messages. I send them a text message, I send them a Facebook message, and I send them a ComApp message. And I just remind them, hey, attendance was due yesterday. Let's get that attendance in. And what I have found is that once they log in for their attendance, they actually start to do a little bit of work. It might be just a small amount, but at least they do some work. And then the rest of the week, I just keep focusing on those kids who are absent, and I try to make sure that I get all my students in attendance. I've found that if you get kids in attendance, they tend to do better, obviously, because they're not hiding from you. I think some of the disadvantages of using the ComApp or text messaging is, and for me anyways, is that I'm paying attention to a lot of different things that go on, and it's harder. It used to be on Facebook, you would see a message that you got a message from somebody, and just going back and forth between all the different ways that I communicate and making sure that I'm efficient about getting back to kids. I think that's important. I have found that I'm 15, 20 minutes sometimes. I don't like having that big of a gap getting back to kids when they ask questions, but I've found that that's what's happening with the ComApp in particular. For text messaging, like if my phone is here, then I can at least see there's a message that's coming. I can go right to that on my computer and do it. So really for me, it's more about, I think, attendance than anything. And then I think everything else pretty much takes care of itself.
Great, thanks, Ty.
So moving on to our next question here. What tools and strategies do you use to engage parents? And Michelle, if you want to kick us off here.
Sure. Those students I'm struggling to get a hold of, I do group texts with the student and their parent. Often just sending a group text gets them to write back to me. Some of my parents have the Pulse app. They can see my daily conversations with their child, and which usually tells exactly what they should be doing that day. So then they can also hold their child accountable for completing the work for the day. Sometimes they'll even write back to me in the Pulse app, and they'll just say, "Hey, this is mom, not student." Something new I started to do later in the fall here, not in the beginning, but I started to message parents for the positive. That has gone a really long ways. I even have 18, 19-year-olds asking me, "Hey, are you going to tell my mom I met my progress?" And I'm like, "Sure, I guess I will again." So that kind of tells me that it's going a long ways at home. They're obviously having a conversation about it, and it's making the student more engaged with their work. I text early in the week. If I can't get a hold of a student or they haven't logged in and worked, I text the parent right away early in the week rather than waiting till Tuesday to be worried about it. And I think that's about it.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Mm-hmm.
So for a lot of my parents, I just add them, for all the minors, I add them directly into the Facebook group if the parent has Facebook. And if they don't, then I send a text message to the parent. So every single Wednesday for my minors, I send the parent the weekly goal. So that way they know ahead of time where the student is starting the week at and where they should end the week at. And I just, like with our Wednesday messages, I just get rid of the part of, "Please let me know what you're learning." That way it's exactly what the student sees is what the parent sees as well. And then with the minors, I check in with the parents if the student starts struggling. So if the student by Friday isn't up to 21%, then I let the parent know what the daily goal is over the weekend. For my tier 3 and 4 students, I might message that parent every single day with what the student's goal is, or even some of my students that have an IEP, their parents want to be reached out to every day. So I just kind of learn what the parent and the student need ahead of time to make the student successful, and then I just make sure I'm doing it every single week, not just when the student is struggling. And then for a lot of the students, I check back in on either Monday or Tuesday just so that the parent knows how close they are to the goal, and I can remind the parent what the goal is for that week.
Good. So I love that idea of good gossip, telling parents good things. Students love that. When we have orientation, we require parents to come for minors, and so that helps to set up the expectation really well. Usually. We also had conferences this year at GR South, and that was really helpful because the students knew that something was coming up. We'll be talking to parents. and because it's just a great check-in to let them know where they're at. When I do orientation, and I remind parents and students throughout that we have a team mindset. So I say, we're all on Team Jimmy, and I'm the teacher. Your parent is the classroom teacher because you're learning at home. And it's a parent, student, teacher trifecta for your success. And so we're all here to help you be successful. And then also make sure that they're on all the communications, whether it's Pulse app or Facebook, and then or texting, and then also Edgenuity, making sure they have Edgenuity. And I'm not sure how much my parents check that, but when students aren't doing well and they find out that they can have an Edgenuity access, they're not very happy usually. So we set up all of our parents with Edgenuity.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Nolan, what do you do?
Edgenuity, I sign up all minors for the Pulse, not the why you calling it Pulse? The Edgenuity family portal. That's what I'm trying to say. The family portal, I make sure all minors are signed up for that. And even some 18 and older, a lot of them were like, hey, if they still want it, they still want to be involved, absolutely, if they are cool with it. Again, we did conferences this past about a month ago now as well. That helps a lot in terms of being good things and letting the good things. So it's always like, you may contact the student who's always maybe not doing their progress, but still making sure you get that positive phone call, still making sure those kids who are doing what they need to do get the positive phone call. How I do have a mindset of, though, and that I believe in helicopter parenting, how it can be a little negative to a student. And so I walk that fine line a bit of saying, okay, what can we do here to get your progress going before I got to make that phone call home? And try to start building that trust a little bit more with the student, saying, hey, reach this goal by this time, reach this goal by this time, because there's sometimes, and I've come across it, where, the parent might come down too hard on the student and they just get completely discouraged. And so I kind of keep that in the back of my mind as well, of parents that can kind of be too checking that Edgenuity thing every single day. Just where are you at? Where are you at? Where are you at? It's okay, I'm glad you're checking it and I'm glad you are involved, but there's also a level of giving a student a little bit of autonomy that does let them feel a little more empowered to do their schoolwork. So even if they aren't doing as bad, just giving them that autonomy works well too.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Ty, what do you do at Three Rivers?
So I think that contacting parents is probably the most important connection that you can make. I reach out to parents early in the semester to find out which mode they respond to, either by phone or text, or if I have to use someone else's phone, or if I have to use a different phone in the center because they use caller ID a lot of times to see who's calling and choose not to answer the phone. So I mix up my communication as far as, trying to get a hold of them. I always try to make sure that I message them almost as frequently as I do the kids, just especially the kids that I know where I can get a good response from their parents. But I also make sure, like the others have said, that I make sure I let them know when they do a good job too. And, and that, because then when you send them another one that says, hey, last week was good, what happened this week? They're like, okay, we'll get something done. But I also, one thing that I don't know if other teachers do this or not is I don't sugarcoat anything. If it's not a very good effort, I let them know it's not a very good effort, but I also let them know if it's an improvement from what they did before. So even if they did 6% one week and then they did 11% the next week, and I'm messaging to let them know that they still didn't make their goal, I always make sure I let them know that it was better and that we need to keep encouraging and just making sure that the parents know that I'm on, the kids' side and their side, and just trying to make sure that they're getting their work done.
Awesome. Thank you all for sharing. And it sounds like you all involve parents in a slightly different way, but you're all very intentional about making sure parents are involved in that educational process and making sure they are in the know through a variety of communications. So thank you for that.
Great. All right, I have question number 4. What tools and strategies do you use to engage discouraged learners? Michelle?
This is a good one to piggy off what Ty just said, because there are some of those lower performing students that just aren't engaged, and it is important to show every ounce of growth that they've had, even if it's that they're growing with the communication aspect, but they're not growing with the progress aspect. I always praise them for any growth that I'm seeing, but I also do not sugarcoat and hold them accountable to the requirements and their own goals that they have chosen. For those that are really struggling week to week to week, I honestly do have some really real conversations with them. I ask them, what is your goal in life? Usually they say they want their diploma. I say by when. Usually they tell me earlier than what they're acting on. I honestly sit down and show them, if you get this % progress every single week, it's going to take you 8 years to graduate. And honestly, sometimes it's 8 years or even more we've had. And that's often pretty surprising to them to see it long far away like that. They think that somehow it's going to happen with 1% progress. So actually, once I can have that conversation, though, as much as it can be pretty difficult, it kind of allows us to make the deciding factor. Okay, how are we going to move on? Are you going to move on? Because sometimes that's a deciding factor to them that, this isn't my thing. I'm not in the right program. But for the most part, they decide that, okay, yes, we got to do something different. We sit down, we talk about what needs to be different. So is it that you're managing your time incorrectly, or is it that you don't have time? Because that's 2 different things. And so we can have some really real conversations. I do a lot of questioning and listening, and then it kind of allows me to see where to move forward from there. I think most importantly, setting attainable goals. I started off saying I wanted 30% from everybody. I realized real quickly that was unrealistic, and they also felt it was unrealistic. So now that I've set more individualized goals, I think that just automatically has them more engaged because it's attainable. It's something they can actually meet, and they're able to experience some of that success. I think that's about it.
All right. Great.
Yeah, so I do a lot of the same things as well. So I start with a smaller goal with a student, because if they can't hit the 34%, then maybe depending on what's going on in that kid's life, you even need to start down at like 10%. I try to keep 17 as the smallest goal. And I let the student or tell me, when are you going to log in? What's your schedule like this week? And come up with what's going to work for them. Because if I keep telling them, you need to log in at this time today, that's just never going to work. They have to have the buy-in. And then I start to increase their goal that we start with. So maybe it's just a 5% increase each week. And then I ask them, can you do 25% this week based on your schedule or what you have going on? And a lot of times the answer is yes. And sometimes the answer is no. And that's okay, because then early in the week we can talk about what can you do, and we can set a goal based on what they can actually get done that week. That way they can feel good about meeting that goal. But in the end, I do want them to get up to, we always said 34%. So we always want them to get up to the 34%. And then we also sit down, I try to sit down with the students at the beginning of the year and come up with if you do 17% a week, you'll graduate, if it's a freshman, 8 years, like you said, 34%, you can graduate in 4 years, 50%, you can graduate in 2 years. That way the student will know ahead of time what they actually need to be doing in order to graduate when they would like to graduate. So then we can talk about when they want to graduate and then what they're actually doing and what the difference between the two would be. Sometimes with my students too, they don't, if I tell them you need to get your class up to, I don't know, let's say 50% that day to reach their goal, they don't understand how many assignments that actually is to get up to 50%. So I'll go to the assignment calendar and send them a snapshot of you need to do your 3 quizzes, or you need 2 quizzes and 1 test. That way they can actually see what 7% is, or whatever their goal is for that day. So they can actually picture it and know what lessons and what they have to accomplish that day. And then the other big thing involving parents, even if they're over 18, I try to get that parent on the FERPA form, because even with our kids that are up to 22 years old, even if you can just get a girlfriend, boyfriend, best friend on it, it doesn't matter. If you have somebody else to reach out to say, hey, what's really going on with this person, and dig deep to why they're not doing their work, that goes a long way too. And then a grad plan. So everyone will say, I want to graduate. So coming up with a plan to show them what they actually have to do to graduate, sometimes that's the light bulb that they need in order to start getting their work done again.
That covers it.
You're welcome.
Yeah, a lot of great ideas. Just to reiterate, scaffolding, I know it was already said twice, but half of the business is building confidence with students. You can't have them build a pyramid in a day. So scaffolding, give them those small goals, and then stretching them, challenging them from those small goals. When I read this, I was thinking more about disengaged learners, but focusing on that relationship. Some students don't even bring up percentages or goals, just see how they're doing, and lead with that, and might lead with that for a couple of days too. Try and build that relationship and build that value. And then ask about content specifically. So going in my daily messages, even going into Edgenuity and seeing what lesson they're on, and asking about that lesson so that they get a connection then to what they're learning from me. I don't always do that. So hopefully that just hits a different synapse in their minds, and they just orient more around their classwork. And home visits. Good home visits and home visits challenge students either way. If a student's not doing well, we can still bring them a Jamocha shake from Arby's and encourage them that way. Sometimes do a home visit just to say, hey, I can't get a hold of you. Let's talk about what our plan's going to be. So,
Excellent. All right, Nolan, you're up.
Yeah, that last point Carrie made about graduation, that's like one of the number one things. If you reinforce graduation and say, hey, this is what we're working towards, like that can be a super big motivation. But a lot of the times this is like basically my 0%, those who are just not doing anything. And what we do, on these boards here, we'll put up all our 0% after the week. And we'll basically write a little reason like, hey, what's going on? And I don't even mention school when I first talk to them. I'm like, what are you doing? What's going on? Like, what's going on with life? Like, is there anything you just want to talk about? What can we do here? And I found that once they get invested in me as a person, or they get invested in us, like with working with them, that's when they'll start to like maybe come around a little bit more, just log on, maybe get a 1% in. I'm like, hey, you got on. You hadn't got on since count day, but now you want to get on and do 1%. Hey, like that's good. That's progress. That's moving forward. I mean, I've gotten that question. I don't know why we're learning this. What am I learning this for? When am I going to use this? And I'm like, man, I used to ask that same question. Like, I mean, I'm only 23. I tell them, I level with them. I'm like, I was in your position 5 years ago, guys. Like, I was right there with you. But coming at it from a life perspective and knowing who they are and just saying, there's so much you can accomplish just by getting through and getting to graduation, making that the end goal. I found that you just got to get down and really just get to know that student who is discouraged before any type of progress could be made on my end. I found it tough to just go, hey, make 5% on my end. And so I really just try and sit down, have a conversation, just bring them into the center and just talk. Like, we don't even have to talk about whatever. We'll do a Google Hangout. I'll go to the house. Like, what's up? What's going on? And if there is 0%, but I at least know what's going on, I consider that a success still. I'm like, I'm not like, oh, here's so-and-so. I have no clue why they're not doing work. At least if I know the situation with the house that's going on, because 9 times out of 10, if a student is at 0%, it's almost not even, it's like, I don't even want to do school. They've almost got something going on at home. They've got something going on with family. There's something else. And understanding that can go miles in terms of helping them move forward.
Okay.
All right, Ty, you're up.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, there's not a lot more to add. I think understanding the circumstances, figuring out which kids are really just wasting their time. I mean, they're not doing anything, and there's no reason why they're not doing anything. Finding out and understanding which ones you can save and which ones are not savable. I guess that's kind of, I mean, that's a kind of a, I guess, rough way of looking at it. But there are just certain kids at certain times in their life where it's just not right for them right now. But I think the kids that you've had relationships with for a couple years, and all of a sudden something happens and they're discouraged or they're not. A lot of times it's the class that they're in. They hate that subject and they've had either a really bad experience with it. So maybe inviting them in to sit next to you and work with you on whatever they're struggling with. I can just think of two math kids this semester who, they just hated math. And I said, well, just come in and I'll help you get through it. Those are, I guess, a little bit of the things that I do. And like I said, it's not profound. I think everybody hit on the points of what I was thinking. But a lot of times it's just understanding the circumstances. I think everybody's got circumstances. I mean, even we have circumstances as teachers. And so just understanding, them and showing them that you care about them and what they're going through. I think that's important.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you guys for sharing. It sounds like for all of you, it's really important to get to the why behind the discouragement. And then also, if you have students who aren't engaged at all, it's first building that relationship. And then once you get to that point, then it's having those small goals, scaffolding those goals up and building them up to that long-term goal. So thank you for sharing. So last official question that we have for this panel. And before we get to that too, just a quick reminder for everybody who's tuned in. If you have a question for an individual panel member or a question that you'd like to ask to everyone, go ahead and type it in that chat message and we'll get to that Q&A after we go through this last question here. So final question for all of our panel members here. If a new teacher started today, what's one strategy that you would recommend they implement immediately on day one in order to have success?
I am a new teacher, so I wanted to pick an easy enough strategy, but that would go a long way. This is a very overwhelming job when you first start because there's so many things to learn. So the strategy I would have for them is honestly to get the students set up in the Comm app. It seems to allow me to be much more efficient with my communication, and then it allows me to have better quality time spent with them because I'm not tracking them down. I'm not, having to call three or try to get a hold of them 3 different ways. They really are responding pretty well in the Comm app, and it just allows me to have those conversations more efficiently with them and better quality. And it's easy enough for somebody new who, it's just a good starting place to get that done.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing, Carrie.
My big thing is to build a relationship with the student right away. So even if you're not necessarily talking about school right away, that you start to get to know them. So what's their living situation? What barriers do they have? What are some positive things that they like to talk about? That way, as soon as you start building that relationship with them and knowing them, then to ask them to do schoolwork comes a lot easier than trying to do it the reverse way.
I think the strategy that I would recommend, it might be more like advice, but it can be really easy to get focused on numbers and the dashboards that we look at. And I would say to see everything as student centered. So whether you're talking about hitting 34% every week or you're talking about even opting out, it's always about what's best for the student. So even opting out, I talked to a student on Friday and said, hey, you haven't been doing work for a while now. Do we just need to take a break? You have too much going on right now. How can we help you to be successful in this? Does it mean taking a break? So he was relieved to hear that. And was like, yeah, I want to come back in January. And I think I can do it then. Right now I have a lot of court fees I'm trying to pay off. But even 34%, instead of like, hey, you got to get to 34%, it's right now we're losing progress that you'll have to make up later. And I don't want you to have to do that. So how do we get to a point where we're hitting our goals so that there's not more to do later for you? So maybe just more of a paradigm shift for me anyway. I kind of get stuck sometimes thinking about the numbers, and so that paradigm shift of putting the student in the very center of why we're doing this and communicating that with them.
Nolan?
Yeah. It's been touched on a lot throughout, but I would just say more of a mindset than a strategy. Just be open to learning about your kids and the community that you're serving. I'm lucky to have grown up in the community I work in, so I know a lot of how, in general, the students and just how it all interacts here. But if you're open and willing and listen to the students and really get to know them as people and what they want to do after high school and just what their goals are, what their ambitions are. Once they become invested in you as a person, they start to become so much more invested in their schoolwork. And so I always say there were some students when I first started, I didn't see their face. So I started in like January, didn't see their face until count day. And so it's like even just inviting students in, just say, hey, if you want to come in this day when I first start, and it doesn't have to be everybody at once, just every now and then, hey, I got 5 students coming in on a Thursday to meet me. All right, awesome. I'll have another 5 students on Friday, and just really get to know them face to face. That helps tremendously.
Awesome. Thank you, Nolan. Ty, what about you?
So I think everybody's hit this point, but establishing the relationship with them, and I think since I do all the orientations, and I don't know how to fix this, but I think sometimes the kids are in here, they're tested, they get their classes, they leave, and they don't get. And it's like it's a 4-hour dragged out, 3.5, 4-hour dragged out process where you can't really sit down and get to know them. And I think that day when they come in probably is the most important day, because you should be able to ask some questions about them as people. And the way we do our orientations, if we have mass orientations, is if there's a teacher that's available to do the EDP and the schedule and stuff, it's not necessarily your own student. And yeah, you get to know that student, but when they're not someone that you're interacting with on a day-to-day basis, I don't know how good that is for the student or to set up the beginning of your school year. I think it's probably a better idea to have students when they come in and schedule the orientations in a fashion where, and I know this is a pipe dream, scheduling the orientations where they can meet with their actual teacher before they leave and get to know them before they leave. I think that's important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it sounds like for all of you, that relationship building piece is really important. And it sounds like you all do that, using a variety of methods, which is really cool. That's where we kind of get that creative element, the art of teaching involved there. But it really sounds like that relationship is the building block that you use to work with your students and help them reach their goals. So thank you all so much for sharing your practices today, panel members. We really appreciate you. We're going to go into our Q&A session here really quick. I'm taking a look at the chat. And it looks like we have a lot of people thanking you so much for what you've shared today. So again, thank you for that. We did get a question about caseload size, so just want to address that really quick. Our panel members have varying caseload sizes. That's part of the reason we chose them as well, because they were a good representation of what we have going on currently throughout the organization. So right now the panel members have case sizes varying from 35 to 67 students. Awesome. Chris, do you want to take it away from here?
Yeah, so we're done. Wow. Well, this ends our first ever teacher panel. I know there are several of you out there that we could have chosen, and we had to narrow it down to a few select candidates for this panel. And I just want to thank these guys. Every time I read their notes, we've had a chance to interview them once already, and every time they talk about how they're serving students, I just get giddy. I'm super excited about helping support them. And I hope you guys all took some ideas from this team. I would encourage you to reach out individually to them as well. If there was something you really liked about what they said, please, I'm sure they're more than willing to support you all if you need some assistance. And we've got some material that's in summary form, basically describing and helping you all, along with some examples of communication that they've been willing to provide us, and we'll be getting that out to you along with the link to the recorded session. So thank you all for, oh, we do have another question. Do we want to go ahead and ask that?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. We've got a few questions coming in. It looks like someone wants to know, and we'll kind of do this, you know, round robin. Feel free, panel members, to hop in whenever you have something that you'd like to share. But somebody asked, what's been the hardest challenge about the job?
I think at first it's just to get to know how to do everything. Like, it's very frustrating at first, I think, I think when I first started, it wasn't nearly as complicated. There wasn't as many modes of communication. So, and there wasn't as much, I don't think, accountability as there is now. So I think that part's been just making sure that you're doing everything that you need to do. That's tough.
I think another thing that's hard too is, like at first I made myself available all the time to the students, but being able to shut my computer down and spend a night with my family and not be, you know, like not have myself out there of, yeah, I can do a check at midnight or, you know, whatever time you need it. I think that's really important with this job too, is to take care of yourself. And I think that's really hard when you start caring a lot about the kids, is to just shut it down.
Yeah, and this is probably based on my personality, but I manage anger, I guess, because I feel like a third of the, if this was a factory, a third of the parts aren't passing, right? And so it goes from this, you know, just like a sorrow, disappointment to a frustration, and then, you know, right around February, it's just kind of like, why do I just feel so tense all the time? And it's because I'm constantly striving for these students to get to that next level, and that takes a toll emotionally for me. So for me, it's been also learning to just shut it down. Tuesday nights, it's great to log on and help them, but to be honest, they've had all week, and so I don't really do that much anymore. I'll get on, I'll change some classes, and I'm not going to go fishing, and I'm not going to try and get my numbers up on Tuesday night, because it just isn't healthy for me. So so then also just balance, life balance, work balance, to make sure that I can give my best to the students every day.
Can I also, I'd like to add a follow-up question to that. So a lot of you have mentioned balance is something that's difficult to find in working in the role that you have. What are some things that you've done to overcome this obstacle? What's one way that you can balance your time better, or you know, organize things? How do you overcome that obstacle?
My phone calls, because then I'm not chasing 2As all week. I've got most of them done on Wednesday.
With my 2As too, I'll just I'll send a message of like, attendance please, or like, yo, I need your attendance, or something to like get the students' attention a little bit more. That way it helps with attendance and gets them to log in. But sometimes that helps when you, instead of being too proper, if you bring it down a little bit, they'll laugh at you and then respond.
Yeah, and I think I've noticed that too. Like the most challenging part that like we talk about are zeros, and I always take a lot of personal responsibility for that. And the most challenging part for me has been, you know what, Nolan, you can't set a computer in front of them and have them all do it. You can't take responsibility for it. You can't. It's their life at the end of the day. We're in such an interesting role as like teacher / all like 5 other things that it gets difficult. And to balance that, it's like on Fridays before I go into the weekend, I preface everything I say like, hey, get this done before the weekend. I need to check in before the weekend, like everything. I try and hit everything hard on Fridays to say like, hey, let's go on weekend good, strong, have a good day. Like, let's just get everything taken care of the day. And that's helped me a lot. Just to say over the weekend, I don't need to think about anything. If you need an extra class, yep, I'll put it on there for you, but check what, like, just get everything done before the weekend.
So it sounds like a lot of you have tried to set up some boundaries with students and also with yourself to kind of help alleviate that balance issue and overcome that obstacle.
All right, I think that that does it for our questions. And again, I just want to thank the panel participants. We'll get them a donut or perhaps an old piece of candy from the GR South stash, one or the other. Which one would you like? Thanks again. We're going to do this again, guys. We're keeping an eye on the data. I think the next one that's coming out is for center directors. So those of you who are center directors, look for Jackie and I to drive you nuts. And get in your lives a little bit. It'll be great. Thanks again, guys. You helped change some lives today.